Hello and welcome to Laureate International Universities and today's presentation on leadership in the digital age. I'm Beth Foster and I'm going to be your moderator today. And we're really excited that you joined us for this particular webinar, Leadership in the Digital Age. It's going to have a lot of great information that I think you're going to really find useful moving forward. And I would also like to let everybody know that time allowing, we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So please submit your questions through the Q&A tab and we will address as many questions as possible. We also have somebody in the background that can answer offline questions for you. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter, and that is Dr. Michael Wesch. Hello, Dr. Wesch.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. Now, Michael Wesch has been dubbed the Explainer by Wired Magazine. He is a cultural anthropologist exploring the effects of new media on society and culture. After 2 years studying the implications of writing on a remote indigenous culture in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea, he has turned his attention to the effects of social media and digital technology on global society. His videos on culture, technology, education, and information have been viewed over 20 million times, translated in over 20 languages, and are frequently featured at international film festivals and major academic conferences worldwide. Now, Michael has won several major awards for his work, including a Wired Magazine Rave Award, the John Culkin Award for Outstanding Praxis in Media Ecology, and he was recently named an Emerging Explorer by National Geographic. He has also won several teaching awards, including the 2008 Case Carnegie U.S. Professor of the Year for Doctoral and Research Universities. So, wow, it's just really my pleasure to turn this presentation over to you, Michael, and listen to what you have to say about social media.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. I think the most obvious thing to appreciate at this particular moment is just how all of us are coming together because of the digital age, and this event itself is unimaginable just 20 years ago. All of us coming from all over the world to share this hour together. So it's pretty spectacular just to think, about the 3 billion people on the planet connecting and collaborating in ways they've never connected and collaborated before. That number is quickly rising, and as well as the number of ways that we can connect and collaborate. So I'm going to try to give you some image of what's happening in the digital age, what's about to happen, and how you can navigate that as a leader. So I'm going to start, this is going to be broken down into 3 parts. And the first part is about humans and technology. So I'm an anthropologist. I study all humans in all times and all places. So I'm usually taking a very broad perspective on things. I'm usually thinking in terms of 12,000 year timelines rather than just 20-year timelines. But I want to start here. This is, kind of a vision of what the media landscape looks like today, but you'll immediately notice that this is changing so fast. And in fact, this is really just to touch the surface. If you just look 5 or 10 years ahead, any futurist will tell you that we're headed towards ubiquitous networks, ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous information at unlimited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, on all kinds of devices. And we're moving there fairly quickly. And there's a question about how you could even begin to understand a world like this. And I find the best way to understand it is a bit strange. The best way to understand it for me is actually to get away from it. So I go to places like New Guinea where there is no technology at all to try to understand what technology does to humans. So I'm going to just take you on a quick journey here. I'm going to take you into New Guinea. This is New Guinea is just north of Australia. You fly into the capital city, Port Moresby, and then you can go into the center of the island, and there you'll find places where people have no running water, no electricity, no satellite access, no computers or internet. A very, very different world. So here we are flying into the airstrip here. This airstrip, once you land, your money's no good. There's no cash economy here at all. It's all a gift economy. This is my first trip when I went there about 15 years ago. You can see my greeting when I landed. You can see the airplane wing there. And the airplane comes in about once every 6 weeks, and that's the limit of the contact to the rest of the world for this particular village. So then I'm back here, and then if you really want to jump out of the water to see the world in a new way, you can go even further, right? So I just kept walking, and I came into villages like this and past creatures like this. This is a cassowary in New Guinea, which I didn't know this at the time when I took the picture, but apparently they can disembowel a human, so you don't want to get this close, but I was fairly naive at the time. And then you end up in villages like this, and I ended up spending a very good portion of my life in villages like this. For about 8 years, off and on, I lived in villages like this. And I'll just give you a quick tour of what it looks like. They grow their own food, taro, sweet potato, bananas. They raise pigs. They'll eat spiders, just all kinds of things here. So there's the spiders. They eat their eggs. Snakes are a good deal. Snakes are kind of like a 2-for-1 deal. They get lazy, and after they've eaten, and they go to sleep, and you can then capture them, cut them open, and you get the appetizer as well. So I hope you're not eating right now. Tell this story. This particular image here is actually an image of the house where I live, and you can see there's no technology, there's no media to speak of at all. Everybody's just sharing their lives together, sharing their stories. And you can see actually my legs up in the upper right-hand corner in my sleeping bag. This is where I would sleep, and that night after we first caught that snake was found about 40 meters from where we were sleeping. And so I was thinking, gosh, there's holes everywhere in this hut. A snake like that could come in anytime. So I wrapped myself up extra tight in my sleeping bag, but it's the tropics, and so in the middle of the night, the sleeping bag came off of me, and I woke up and I could feel this thing laying across my chest. It was about it was quite large. It's like about the size of a water bottle around, and I managed to throw it off of me. But as I threw it, I rolled with it. So I know I'm wrapped up in this thing somehow. And then I do manage to get it pinned down with my left hand on the ground, but I try to free my right arm so I can pin it down with 2 hands, but I can't move my right arm. And it's at this time I realize I've actually pinned down my own right arm with my left hand. And then everybody's laughing at me, and I have to figure out how to talk to them, and I don't speak the language at all. This is the beginning of a long series of unfortunate events that were very difficult to live through. And what was interesting, though, was I very quickly learned what it is to live in a world without media. And that story that I just told you actually became a story that I would tell to people that I would meet to sort of, it was a way of breaking the ice, and it was a way of kind of sharing a story in a way that could tell them something about who I am. And what I realized was, in a world without media, the way that you construct your identity, the way that you interact with people is very different than a world saturated with media. So I started studying what it is to live with media versus living without it, what it means in terms of like really big questions about how you interact with people, who you are, how you think about yourself, how you think about others. And those became the foundational questions of my research. Over time, I saw a lot of changes, which I'll get into in just a moment. One more story I'd like to tell is at the worst moment, I kind of broke down, and I remember I was crying on this mountain because I just felt so alone and very disconnected. And these 2 guys who were walking with me sat down beside me, and they started crying too. So I was kind of amazed by their level of empathy that they were showing at that moment. Here we are crying on the side of this mountain. And then they asked me, like, Mike, what are you crying about? And I said, the only thing I could think was that I miss my wife. And I said, I miss my wife. And they started laughing and laughing, and they said, oh, we would never miss our wives. And then they started crying with me again. They said, oh, but we miss our kids. and here they are with their kids there. Now, the reason why I bring up that story is because one of the most striking things of a world without media, which I lived in for all of these years, was this capacity for spontaneous empathy that they were able to show. And when you look at, say, statistics coming out of the United States and Canada right now, we see that empathy is actually on the decline. So the capacity for young people to take the perspective of others has been on the decline now, and there's been a decline over the past 30 years or so. And you could look at New Guinea and you could say, well, why is it that empathy thrives in New Guinea but doesn't thrive in the United States and Canada? And you would say, well, for one thing, in New Guinea, they're all really sharing their lives. There's no media to distract them. They're not looking down at their screens. They're not turning to a television in the corner of the room. They're all deeply sharing their lives. But I think there's another piece here that we need to consider, and that is also that they share everything. They share their deaths as well. They are very vulnerable without the health technologies that say we might have in the United States or Canada. And so they're because of this vulnerability, though, there's as difficult as it is watching people die. Like, here's my friend Joseph, who passed away just 2 days after we were playing soccer together, and then he gets sick, and here he is, passing away. There's this amazing moment of recognizing how vulnerable we all are. And it's from this shared vulnerability that empathy arises. So if we don't have this sense of shared vulnerability, or if we deny that vulnerability, then we end up also denying that sense of connection that we can have with one another. So what we see with the rise of technology is not just the new stuff, but in fact, humans' relationship to technology has always been one in which technology allows all kinds of new possibilities in terms of human connection and opening up new vistas. But a lot of times people use those technologies to actually close themselves off from others. So we have a long history now of seeing technologies used in a way that allow people to move away from each other, to put themselves into boxes and then shop in boxes where they don't know the people working there, and then to look back into their culture through boxes like this, the television. And over time, they just move into more boxes and shop in bigger boxes and look back into the world through these boxes. So by the year 2000, Robert Putnam, in looking at the United States in particular, had said that our levels of community had dropped to the lowest levels of all time. He pointed out that the number of people that somebody could call upon to help them move had gone down to an average of 1.6. The number of people somebody could call if they had bad news, like really bad news, like if they had cancer and they wanted to talk to somebody about it, outside of immediate family, that number was also around 1.6. So these are really disheartening numbers and shows the sort of dark side of technology. Another author is Livien de Couture, who talks about the capsular civilization, that we live in capsules and then put ourselves in other capsules like cars to transport us to the next capsule, and all the while we are disconnected from the world around us. So there's stories like Peter White, who talks about growing up in the 1950s in England, and he says that when he was growing up in the 1950s in England, he was allowed to explore all over his neighborhood unsupervised. This is him some years later exploring Kenya. And then he talks about learning to ride a bike, and he talks about when he was 12 years old, he started hitchhiking. He would put his trust in a stranger to take him over 100 miles and then get back by that night. Now, Peter White did all of that even though he's blind. This is actually Peter White here. And he became a reporter for the BBC. He's a very famous and successful reporter. And he credits his success with this exploration that his parents encouraged during this time. Now, you think about what he did. Like, his parents actually encouraged him to run around his neighborhood unsupervised, something that is rarely done today. He was encouraged to, he actually hitchhiked 100 miles with strangers that he couldn't see. He put his trust in a stranger he couldn't see. That's a level of public trust that is very rare in the world today. And so if you look at kids today, you actually see these leashes being sold, and just as a point of comparison, this is a friend of mine in New Guinea. That's a real knife, and you see the comparison here between how far we've come and what technology might have done to us in terms of kind of cutting off our capacity to trust other people and take chances and explore the world. There's this quote from Brene Brown where she says, "We are the most addicted, medicated, obese, in debt, and busy adult cohort in human history." She says, "We are numbing ourselves, and you cannot numb emotions selectively." Essentially, what she's saying is that we're using technologies and all these distractions to numb ourselves to the possibilities of connection and all kinds of new opportunities. And at the same time, when we numb ourselves to the possibilities of pain and rejection, we're also numbing ourselves to those possibilities of connection, joy, and as well as the opportunities they might bring. So back in New Guinea, one of the interesting things that helped me understand technology a little bit more deeply was that technology did come into the society I was working in while I was there. And the technology was not cell phones, it wasn't internet access, it was simply writing. And the writing was of the census book and the law book. But the two had tremendous effects. So for example, when they were trying to do a census, which is a simple exercise of just listing people in the book, they turned out that most of the people in these villages did not have names. And they did not have names because everybody they ever saw they already knew. And they had a relationship with that person, and they would call that person by the name of that relationship. So if they were their sister, they would call them sister. If they were the mother, they would call them mother. If they were a trading partner, they would call them trading partner. And they had to actually invent new names that they had never used before just to put them in the census book. And then other changes happened as well. So the villages used to be built like the one on top here. And then they started mapping out villages on paper to look more like a grid pattern, like in squares and straight lines. And so they ended up rebuilding their villages to look like the one on the bottom here. They actually numbered the houses so that they would look like the census book. So the technology of the census book is actually transforming the society quite dramatically, both giving people names as well as transforming the way that they live. And then you go to another key moment in any village's life is this moment where people are fighting, having some kind of dispute. And the way they used to handle this in the past is they would all come out into the open and they would try to heal the relationship at the center of the dispute. And when this new technology came in, the law book, these individuals who were trying to heal the relationship were instead brought into a court of law and stood up and had to stand against the letter of the law. They now stand as individuals and stand to get punished rather than actually try to heal the relationship. So these are all fairly dramatic changes that are happening during the time I am there, and all of them are related to this new medium that's coming in. And one of the most dramatic things that happened was there were only about 10 people out of 2,000 who could actually read and write. And these 10 people got together here in this meeting house to discuss the future of their village. And the first thing they decided was that only people who could read and write should be able to be the ones who can make these big decisions and to vote. The second thing they decided to do, they had a discussion about whether or not they should continue to move people into these villages that I showed you earlier with their straight lines and actually their larger populations as well. And they voted unanimously that yes, that they should continue to do this. And that involved, even if it meant burning the houses of people and forcing them to move, that's what they would do. So the next few months were really traumatic in this village. And at the end of those 3 months, everybody looked around, and this is maybe the most surprising thing. Everybody, including the people who were leading the changes, looked around and thought, we probably did the wrong thing here. They felt seduced by the medium. They felt seduced by the clean lines of the census book. They felt seduced by the clean lines of the maps that they were creating. And in trying to create a society that could match up to those clean lines, they really created something of a disaster. And so what I learned from all this is that, we often say that media are tools. but they're really not just tools. And they're not just means of communication either. Media are much more powerful than that. They shape what can be said, who can say it, who can hear it, how those messages will be crafted, who will be able to receive them. There are simply some things you can say in one medium that you cannot say in another. There are ways in which you can bring people together in one medium that you can't bring them together in another medium. So media ultimately mediate relationships. They shape those relationships. So when media change, our relationships change, and ultimately our whole society can change. So for example, if you look at just the introduction of television, the introduction of television changes the relationships of the family. Suddenly, the living room changes. They rearrange the furniture so that it faces the television. The furniture no longer faces one another so they can talk. It faces the corner of the room so they can watch the television. And in many societies, this has become not just the living room, but the dining room. This is where people actually share their meals, if you could call it sharing their meals. They're actually just watching TV and not really engaging with each other. As Marshall McLuhan says, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. And that leads us to part two. So part two then is to think about what are these new technologies that are out there, and how might they be seducing us? How might they be changing us in some significant way? And so when I came back from New Guinea, the world was just buzzing with new technology. I came back in 2004, and this was right at the dawn of, MySpace was still around, Facebook was coming onto the scene, Wikipedia was starting to rise, Google, of course, had become a household name. So digital technology was just all the rage. And I started wondering whether or not there wasn't an analogy to what I just saw in New Guinea. Might there be some big changes to our culture happening through this new technology? So I created this little video. I won't show the video here. I'll just show a few screenshots. The video is called "The Machine is Using Us," or "Us Using Us." And it looks at the change from text on paper, which tends to be unilinear, to digital text, and how digital text can be different. And so I looked at it's kind of a geeky part of the video, but I looked at HTML and how HTML is different than XML, and what happens when XML gets released. Well, a lot of the foundational changes to the code of the internet started to change what we saw on the front end of the internet. So things like blogs started to emerge, so anybody who could type could have a good-looking website. And it wasn't just text. There was also new ways of sharing videos. And so ultimately, this rage of Web 2.0 was ultimately about linking people, and it was about linking people who are sharing, trading, collaborating. It was really not just about information, right? This is about a whole new way of relating to one another. So I ended the video by pointing out that we need to rethink copyright, authorship, commerce, governance, love, ourselves, virtually everything. So then, so I made this video, and I just kind of sat back. I kicked it out to some friends, and my friends actually then started passing it around. So I released it on a Wednesday. By Friday, it had just over 200 views. And I remember thinking as an anthropologist that if over 200 people read your work, it's a really big deal. So I started taking screenshots, tracking its progress. And what's interesting is the story of this video and how it spread actually gives you a pretty good sense of how new media works and how it works differently from old media. So I actually created this video on this little farm in Kansas. I was living on this little farm in Kansas. I was working in the basement and created the video. I was working in collaboration with this guy in the Ivory Coast who created the music, and he goes by the name Deus King. And so he created the music. He released it as a Creative Commons, under a Creative Commons license, which allowed me to use it in Kansas. So here we are collaborating across time and space. By Saturday morning, it had over 1,000 views, and now every time I hit refresh, it was doubling in views. So I realized, oh my gosh, like it's going viral, something amazing's happening. So I decided to figure out what was happening. Now this is just the video itself is just one piece of all the user-generated content that gets put out on the web on any given day. There is now the amount of content that gets put on the web in any given day really dwarfs the amount of professionally produced content produced throughout all time. So the amount of content being produced today is just astonishing. So what was happening to my video, and the reason why it's going viral is because it's being shared on multiple different formats. Of course, Dig would be one. People can dig it, they could vote it up, or they could bury it, they could vote it down, but people were voting it up, so it was spreading quickly. This is a form of user-generated filtering, much like you see with Facebook or Twitter. These are just ways in which people are sharing material, and as they're sharing it, their collective actions are essentially filtering the web so that the best stuff, or maybe not the best stuff, but at least the stuff that is most shareable and likable, gets spread. Even somebody linking to something is, in a sense, making a vote for it, right? Because Google is using the PageRank algorithm, which is counting the number of links that people are making to these materials and then using it in their search algorithm. This is what you might call user-generated organization. So all these things that we are doing online are actually organizing the web. Even though it seems like we're acting in our own interest, we are actually contributing to a larger process of filtering and organizing the web. So if you look at Google, for example, they use 57 signals to decide what they should put at the top of your search results. And your search results are actually different than my search results. Everybody's search results are actually tailored to that particular person based on these 57 signals. Signals like where you are, what you are using, what you are doing, what you might do, and ultimately who you are, and just you. Now, how they know all this stuff is because they've aggregated a large amount of information. You might call it, I call it the database of the mundane, because it's a lot of mundane aspects of your life that, that you may think are insignificant. But when you aggregate all of that information and you compare it to the information that's out there about billions of other people, suddenly that information becomes meaningful. So when I'm on Facebook, what's kind of astonishing is that Facebook can give me an advertisement that says 36 and balding. And, how does Facebook know how old I am or that I'm balding? Like, that's amazing that Facebook can know that. Or if I go to Yahoo, and if I log in on a public terminal, I get this web page, right? This is from 2011 when they first released this technology. So they released this technology that actually, they did it behind the scenes. They didn't tell anybody they did this. But actually, Yahoo has about 100 different front pages, and you get a different front page based on who you are. So on a public terminal, I got this one, but on my own computer, I got this one. And you can see the headline here is Scientific Novices Solve AIDS Mystery. And they did this by playing an online game. And so I'm very interested in digital technology and how people can solve problems with digital technology. And Yahoo knows this. You can see here that they have Netflix information here. They have all kinds of things that are relevant to my interests that are being displayed because they have followed my search history, because they are aware of who I am through these types of things. So this even gets more sophisticated when you look at mobile technologies. Mobile technologies allow these companies to know exactly where you are and where you've been and what you've been doing. And all of this, again, is this contributing to a distribution process, right? So you're actually receiving content based on all these factors. So if you look at what's happened here is that we've replaced professional content, professional filtering and editing and distribution with this user-generated model that's actually augmented by technology, so that all of us, in a way, are creating this landscape. So interesting little story about my video. My video was going viral. By Sunday morning, it was in the top 5 of all videos, and I was like super excited about this. So I'm down in my basement hitting refresh, hoping that it gets to #1. It happens to be Super Bowl Sunday in the United States at the time, which is a big day in the United States, and it means that there's all these Super Bowl commercials that come out, and I just knew that once the Super Bowl commercials hit the internet, they were going to wipe out the top 20. So I really wanted my video to get to #1 for Super Bowl, and so I'm watching it carefully and hitting refresh, and fortunately by noon that day, there it was at #1. Now, it's kind of an interesting comparison to make to these Super Bowl commercials. These Super Bowl commercials represent the old media, right? In which people are paying advertisers like $1 million to produce their content. Just for 30 seconds, they're paying $1 million US. So around the same time, Doritos and a lot of other companies got this idea that they could just have their users create the content for them. And so they created a contest. So, since you make it, we air it. The idea was that they would have this contest and the best video would get shown on the Super Bowl. And so these kids did this and they asked them how much this video cost, and they said it was just $12.79. It was the cost of breaking some bags of chips as they were doing the filming. Now, if you look at the overall impact of that video, which cost $12.79, it was pretty good. It was actually in the top 5 of all videos that were released on the Super Bowl. And in terms of its emotional score, it was in the top 5. But it cost $2.6 million just to get it on the air. So if you're doing the math, that's roughly still $2.6 million. And they asked the advertising executives, why would you spend that kind of money to, reach to produce a video and to get the video out there? And they said, well, it's all about creating buzz, and creating buzz not just around the water cooler at work, but also online. So if you looked at the video that had the most buzz the next day, that video cost $0 to produce because that was still my video. So that's kind of a surprising thing, right? That this video created on this farm in Kansas by essentially just 2 people, one guy in Kansas, another guy in Africa, collaborating, can spread to millions of people and really underscores this idea that we need to rethink all of these things. So this is really, though, just the beginning, right? Because I mentioned that we're headed towards, ubiquitous networks, ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous information, unlimited speed, about everything, everywhere. Now, I really want to focus in here on this everything piece, because nowadays, there are essentially digital technologies everywhere, and they're not just in the devices that you hold. There are also essentially URLs on the products that are non-digital, like shoes with these 2-dimensional barcodes on them, or video games and things with 2-dimensional barcodes all over the world. But even more interesting are these RFID chips, which are in place in packaging for all kinds of products all over the world. So this started with the Galaxy S3 was maybe the first mainstream phone that could do this, but these phones can actually sort of talk to each other just by bumping into each other or coming close in contact with one another. They can also, of course, scan RFID chips on products, or you can pay for your products using this thing. Now, what does that mean? What does it really mean when this stuff starts to scale up? Let's just start looking 5 years into the future. We know that several 100 million of these little RFID tags are used in food packaging already. The system is in place in over 1,000 Walmart stores, and as many as 500 billion of these little RFID tags are put into circulation annually. So these are little tags that your phone can actually see. So potentially your phone can actually kind of know what's around it. It can know what products are around it. These things don't disappear after you purchase the product. So you could potentially be walking around your house and your phone can actually find things for you by knowing where they are. To take it a step further, these little RFID chips are actually used in humans as well. They actually implanted in people. People use it for access control, like governments and high security organizations use these things. So if you want to access a door, you have to have a chip actually implanted in you. There's even nightclubs in Barcelona, Spain that use these. So you don't have to carry your wallet with you. You just have this chip embedded in you. Now, this is probably a bit spooky to some of you. What's really interesting about this is that all of this information that's being gathered about us, this information of the mundane, is becoming more and more readable by machines. And we're actually teaching machines with every search, link, tag, and note that we make. And the web is in a sense learning about us and begins to appear intelligent. So this is a very simple example, but when my video was going viral, I saw a lot of advertising for the University of Virginia PhD programs showing up next to my name. Now, why would that happen? Because, you know, it has my name, the video doesn't have anything to do with the University of Virginia, but my name in this database of the mundane is associated with a PhD from the University of Virginia, because that's where I got my PhD. So Google knows this, and it's just kind of a dumb machine trying to make a guess at what would be relevant. But as you know, it's getting smarter. And that's the other piece of these future trends that I think people are overlooking, is this ubiquitous computing. Computing is starting to just now crest to a point where it's getting very, very intelligent. We've seen Watson, for example, an IBM product, actually beat the best humans in the world at Jeopardy, this quiz show. And here Ken Jennings is saying, "I, for one, welcome our new computer overlords," as he gets beat by this computer. Lipson and Schmidt at Cornell University, there's some researchers who looked at some really complex phenomenon and how computers can handle it. So here's a double pendulum, which takes all kinds of bizarre twists and turns. It looks completely random. And they created this program called Eureka that can actually analyze the movements of a complex device like this and then predict what's going to happen next. And no human can actually understand the formula and equations that Eureka is putting out, but we know these equations work. So what's happening with Eureka is that we're essentially seeing a computer that can come to scientific insights that humans don't understand. And speaking of not understanding, we now know, for example, a lot of our best scientists are actually on Wall Street, and they're using computers to essentially game the system, you might say. And at one point, the Dow in the U.S. took a 1,000-point dip in just a matter of seconds. It was called the flash crash of 245. Again, what's interesting about this flash crash of 245 was that we know that computers caused it, but we don't know how or why. Over 70%, almost 80% of trades on Wall Street are now done by computers, not by humans. So this is a pretty dramatic shift in which million-dollar traders are being replaced by machines. So back into a bit more close to our world, this is Target Superstore in the United States. Of course, Target is tracking purchases as well and trying to understand who their customers are. So this one guy shows up at Target one day, and he has this coupon book that was sent to his daughter, who's 15 years old. And this coupon book is full of coupons for pregnancy stuff and all kinds of parenting stuff. And he comes in really upset at Target. He says, "What are you doing sending this to my 15-year-old daughter?" And they're all very apologetic. And then 2 days later, he calls Target back and he says, "I have to apologize. It turns out some things were happening here that I didn't know about." And it turns out Target knew that his daughter was pregnant before he did. And the way Target knew this was not because she'd gone in and purchased pregnancy vitamins or anything like that. It was that she had bought some new towels and some unscented lotion. And it turns out if you buy these two things together, there's a 70% chance you're pregnant. This is what we mean by the database of the mundane. It's this incredibly smart analysis of your behavior that's allowing companies to essentially learn your secrets. So what we saw with the Google, recognizing that I'm a PhD from the University of Virginia is really child's play. Same thing with Facebook and recognizing that I'm 36 and balding. Again, that's low-level stuff compared to what we're about to see because of technologies like Hunch. So Hunch is this technology which basically really focuses on these mundane facts about ourselves. So for example, you might be somebody who likes to use pencils. And it turns out that if you like pencils, you are more likely to ride a bike than drive alone to work. So for example, here's a little demonstration of this. Compared to people who prefer pencils, gel pen users are more likely to drive alone to work or walk or bike to work. It turns out they're more likely to drive alone to work. they're 23% more likely to do so. So if you're on Amazon and you order a bunch of pencils, suddenly this database of the mundane is created that knows that you like pencils, and it's also going to know then that you are more likely to like walking and biking versus somebody who buys gel pens. So this type of technology is, of course, used for Netflix to provide movie recommendations. It's used by Pandora, which is allowing us to figure out music recommendations for people. But here's where things get really interesting. There these technologies that maybe you're not familiar with that are used by the industry themselves. For example, Music X-Ray. Music X-Ray is a platform, it was a program, an algorithm created by a guy who wanted to predict the next big album, the next big thing in music. So he fed this algorithm 300 albums and indicated which ones were really good and which ones had sold a lot of records and which ones had not. And he was able to see that there were clusters just allowing the computer itself not to hear the music, but to analyze the music digitally. It found certain patterns in the data structure itself. And then he turned this loose on 300 new albums that had never been released before. And out of those 300 albums, his algorithm said, there are no good albums here except for one. And this one the computer predicted would have 9 out of its 13 songs would be big hits. And it was right. It was Norah Jones's album, which ended up winning like 9 Grammys and being one of the best albums of the last 10 years in terms of overall sales. Nobody could have predicted that because Norah Jones doesn't really sound like anybody that's ever come before, but this computer actually figured it out before humans could. Taking it even a step further are people like David Cope, who are creating digital technologies that actually create music. Some of his programs have actually created music that has that actually tricks music theorists and music historians into thinking they're hearing a new Bach composition that's never been heard before. And in fact, it's just his computer that's actually creating these. So just take it one more step. There's a lot of these articles you'll see online. This one here is just a football score from the United States. This is American football. And this entire article was written by a computer with no human intervention at all. And you're now seeing more and more of this happening. Some people have predicted that by the year 2017, we could see a Pulitzer Prize written by a computer program. So these computer programs are getting very, very smart. They're changing the whole way that we work. They're changing the nature of the job market. And if you're really interested in this particular aspect of my talk, you might check out The Second Machine Age by Brinchelson and McAfee. They go through a lot of the ramifications of some of the things I just talked about. The thing that I want to underscore, though, is that if we come back to that core issue and whether or not how is the machine using us, how is it might be seducing us, we have to recognize very clearly that media are changing. And it's almost like our world is on fire. Our relationships are changing quickly. And our communities are changing, our societies are changing, and ultimately we are changing as well. So that leads us to part 3, which is how do we lead in a space like this? So if you look at our world, one thing to point out is that while it appears that we're very, very connected, we actually feel less connected. So people are hungering for connection and end up feeling more disconnected. And one way to talk about leadership then in this domain is to say that to lead in technology, you cannot lead with technology. You cannot let technology lead you. Now that might seem a little bit backwards, but you really have to start with having a vision. You have to have a sense of what you want to do in the world and for the world. Then you build a community around it, and then you leverage technology. I'll give you a few examples of where this works. This is in my hometown, where we brought together 200 students around a core vision. We wanted to create a more bicycle-friendly community. And so we brought together 200 students to help with this. We leveraged digital technology. Here we're using OpenStreetMaps, which allows them to map our community And what we did was we tried to map it in terms of how a bicyclist would see the community. We measured curve lane widths, traffic speed, traffic volume, and every street that was dangerous got a red marking. The streets that were safe got a green marking. And then over the next day or so, the students created solutions for the core problems throughout the town. They shared these with the community, and ultimately that set the groundwork for a new 5-year master plan that has completely changed our town. So that nowadays we are widely regarded as one of the most bicycle-friendly communities in the state. And it all happened because we had a vision, and then we brought together a community, and we leveraged technology to do it. So again, it's just about having this vision, bringing a community together, leveraging technology. Here's another example. In this example, we wanted to share some information, and we needed to get a viral video out. So how do you create a viral video? It's very difficult, of course. What we did in this case was we brought 100 students together, we pooled all our money together, and then we just ran around campus actually giving people money, just kind of surprising them with gifts of money. And then we welcomed them heartily back to campus. We bought people lunch. Here you can see the students saying who paid for it, and then we all wave at her. These are all scenes from the video. Here's we went and we bought somebody's textbooks for them. So we all just jump in here and we lay all the money on the table, and then we run off. And we even parked a car for somebody by lifting up their car and moving them in. We help people cross the street by lifting them up. All of this made like for a funny video, but what we were really trying to do was trying to produce something that could promote K-State Proud, which is an organization that's not just a t-shirt. A lot of people have these t-shirts that say K-State Proud, but in fact, it's students helping students, like students like Hannah McSpadden, who survived cancer, but she no longer had any money after paying for medical bills to stay in school. And so K-State Proud is an organization that collects money and then gives money to students who need it when they need it. Of course, this creates a lot of good buzz for the campus, and ultimately gets spread around, and it does indeed go viral on websites like Upworthy. So I'll share one more example to really drive it home. This idea that you have to have a vision and then leverage a community, leveraging the technology to make it happen. So here's Sean Ahmed, who was inspired by Jeffrey Sachs, who said we can end poverty in our lifetimes. And Sean thought, well, that sounds great. How do we do that? So he moves to Bangladesh. He takes a camera with him, and he starts making videos about what poverty actually looks like on the ground. And in the process, he gets almost 300,000 Twitter followers. And all these followers want to know, how can they help? So Sean then leverages the technology. He brings this community together of hundreds of thousands of people who want to help. And then he creates a community that connects them to the community in Bangladesh, so that he basically takes in money, and then he shows people exactly how he's spending the money. He lets people vote on how he's spending the money. He creates almost total transparency in how he's spending the money. And this then, it really comes full circle back to this idea that media mediate relationships. What he's trying to do is actually use the medium to create relationships. And ultimately, that's what leadership in the digital age will be all about, this focus on relationships, understanding how we can bring people together, how technologies can facilitate that, and ultimately leveraging technology to do just that. So that's my... Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Michael,
Right.
we can hear you.
Okay, great. How long ago did you lose me?
Just when you were pretty much stating that, that's your interpretation or your presentation.
Okay, great. So we're ready for questions then?
We are, and thank you so much. That was extremely eye-opening and gave me a whole new perspective of the digital age, and it's somewhat frightening in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It really is. But we did receive some questions, and the first question is, do you hold a degree in sociology? Your sharing so far has been full of sociological insights, and that was, of course, when you were talking more to the area of New Guinea.
Well, my degree is in anthropology, but we are very much sister disciplines, you might say. I mean, we study the same things and read the same stuff. In fact, it's hard to tell the difference between a sociologist and an anthropologist these days. So I guess the answer is yes, in a way. Yeah.
Okay. The next question: how is, excuse me, how is this technology affecting you and learning?
Well, I think basically what we have right now is essentially. Well, let me tell you a story. This is a really great story. There's this guy, Seymour Papert, who's one of the, for 50 years, he's been leading people's thinking in how technology can improve learning. And he was one of the first people in the 1960s to really think about how computers could be used for learning. And he has this great story where in the 1990s, he started, this is 1991, so it's before the World Wide Web really took off. And really a lot of people, most people wouldn't even know about the World Wide Web at the time that it was even going to take off. And he was with a bunch of kindergartners, like 4-year-olds, and they asked him how giraffes sleep. And he didn't know, even though he grew up in South Africa, he didn't know how giraffes sleep. So he decided to try to see if he could find out. So he went to all of his books and he was looking through all his books and he couldn't figure out how giraffes sleep. And then he realized as he's looking through all his books, he thought, you know, someday even these 4-year-olds will be able to find the answer to this because they will have at their fingertips what he called the knowledge machine. And this is very like, you know, what a visionary to even see this, but he envisioned that 4-year-olds one day would have access to devices which they could use just their hands and just use basic gestures to point to and find videos and pictures of giraffes sleeping and know exactly how they sleep. So now today, you can test this yourself. If you go to YouTube and you look up giraffes, you get something like 56,000 hits. And if you look up giraffes sleeping, you get thousands of hits. And, you know, you can go to Google Scholar and you can look up on Google Scholar like how do giraffes sleep, and you get these very sophisticated published articles on how giraffes sleep. And you'll see that they spend most of their time not sleeping, but when they do sleep, they put their head on their croup. And then you might be like, well, what's a croup? And you can look that up on Google, right? You Google croup, and suddenly you get all these images of giraffes sleeping with their heads curled around on their backside. And so then you know what a croup is. Now, that indeed is the knowledge machine, right? This is what I mean by this spectacular time in which 3 billion people are connecting and collaborating in ways they've never connected and collaborated before. But at the same time, as Seymour Papert noted in the early 90s, was that this thing is going to depend on questions. If people don't have interesting questions, there's really nothing to be learned there at all. And in fact, it becomes not a knowledge machine, but a distraction device. And it is a very seductive and powerful distraction device. And of course, we all use it as a distraction device at times. But what's most important is that we nurture our sense of wonder and curiosity. We need to really nurture our sense of vision and purpose so that we can leverage the enormous opportunity and capacity that it gives us to learn.
During the presentation, you gave a quote from Brené Brown, and they were asking if you could repeat that or possibly go back to that slide so that they could copy it.
Sure. So that's from, she actually gave a TED Talk. So if you're interested, if you look up Brené Brown I believe it's called The Power of Vulnerability is the name of the talk. You can look at that there. So this is the quote is, "We are the most addicted, medicated, obese, in debt, and busy adult cohort in human history." She goes on to say, "We are numbing ourselves, and you cannot numb emotions selectively."
And thank you again for sharing that. In part 1, human and technology, using the, and I hope I'm saying this right, Papua Guinea setting, how is health epidemic mitigated?
How is what
Health
mitigated?
epidemic mitigated.
Oh, you know, it depends on how isolated you are. There are places in New Guinea where they are not, and there have actually been epidemics within the last 15 years that have wiped out entire villages. So it's a very sad situation. The main way that they can be mitigated is, you know, given the communications infrastructure right now, is you have to get one person that needs to walk sometimes 2 or 3 days to the nearest radio. And it's a simple 2-way radio, and then that 2-way radio is used to get information out to the health network, which is mostly ran by missionary groups. So a lot of people are working on, you know, improving the communications infrastructure there to help with that kind of problem. Yet at the same time, you know, I suppose we could also be concerned about creating the kinds of problems that we have with kind of saturation of media. But I don't think that would really be a tremendous problem there. I mean, people are deeply involved in each other's lives, and a couple of cell phones I don't think will change that too dramatically.
And we have about 3 more minutes. We've got quite a few really interesting questions. Are you okay to stay on for just a few minutes after the top of the hour?
Yeah, right. Definitely.
The next question, it's interesting to see how simple changes in technology change our society. How does this affect people's culture?
Well, I mean, it is amazing, and there are some very simple things that change our society. You know, somebody asked about learning earlier. People don't even realize this, but the blackboard, you know, just like the simple blackboard, was a tremendous change in education in the 1800s. Until then, you know, there was no real easy way to display information on a shared platform that everybody could look at in the room. And that really changed the way people teach, and it changed the way people thought about education. Other tiny little things really mattered. Like, you know, it's only in the last 120 years that we've been grading each other. Like this whole like notion of marks and grades, you know, getting an A or a B or a C, that's all new. So that's new from an anthropologist perspective. It's new, and again, like has this dramatic effect. So as to how it happens differently in each case. But the way I think there's most important thing is to think about how those things change. And the way to think about how those things change is not to focus on the technology, but instead to think about what's actually happening to the relationship. How is it changing the way we relate to one another, or the structure of our society? How is it changing the way information flows, or what kinds of information can flow? How is it changing the way we connect and collaborate with one another? Those are the really big questions to ask.
How can SMEs leverage technology for lifelong learning to maintain competitive edge?
SME, what's an SME?
That I'm not sure.
Social media.
Subject matter expert.
Subject matter experts, okay.
Thank you, Hugo.
So, and all right, so how can subject matter experts
leverage technology for lifelong learning to maintain competitive edge?
Right. So that's, I think there's like a bit of a dance to be done there.
So we just got clarification from the question asked, the person who asked the question. It's small and medium enterprises. That might change your answer there.
Yeah. Small and neat. Well, that's a great question. Well, I think like any learning situation, there's a couple things about that. So the first piece is always going to be about engagement. The key thing about learning is that people don't learn unless they're engaged. And so in a small to medium enterprise, typically being engaged means you need to have, the number one thing you need to do is foster a culture that people believe in, foster a vision that people believe in. And once you have that in place, the learning becomes a lot easier, but it still isn't easy, especially when you have a situation where a lot of the information might actually be tacit rather than explicit. And those are words we use in anthropology to designate information and knowledge that cannot be easily expressed. A lot of the knowledge and expertise that is contained in an organization is actually not easily shared. You can't really talk about it. The only way to really share it is to have somebody actually do it with you. So one way of doing that I've seen that's effective is simply to put people. One is to put people in conversation more often that are from different spaces within your enterprise. The famous example of that is, Steve Jobs at Pixar, when he closed down all the bathrooms in the building except for one. That meant that everybody had to walk across the whole building to get to that one bathroom, and it forced everybody to talk to each other. That's kind of a classic example. But more than that is really just is creating those opportunities to connect with each other, but also potentially moving people around the organization at least sporadic, at least sort of like on a trial basis. Not where you would move people around and have them abandon their expertise, but allow them maybe just to sit in the shoes of somebody, even for an hour or 2 hours, who's doing something else, to really let them see what that job looks like. Some really amazing things happen when you do that, when you get people out of their comfort zone, have them see a different part of the organization and see how that works. It really allows them to envision the whole. I think that's the number one thing that is missing, is we so often just see the parts and we don't see the whole. And little things like that can really help with that.
And we have one final question. Can you please comment on net neutrality and the importance to net users in general?
Yeah. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with net neutrality, the core issue as it is talked about in the media right now is that basically that there's concern that internet providers could actually start essentially speeding up some people and slowing other people down, and giving some people an advantage over others. Where this really affects all of us is, as it is right now, the web is a flat playing field, and it's a space where if I want to make a video in Kansas, I can do that, and I can put it out there, and it will load as fast as any other video out there. If suddenly I had to pay for access, or even if YouTube had to pay for access, let's say it's not me that's paying for the access, but suddenly Google or YouTube has to pay to make sure that their stuff runs through the pipes as fast as somebody else's stuff. Now YouTube and Google have to cover that cost somewhere. They might pass that cost on to me, the creator of the video. So suddenly now, if I have to pay even a very small amount to make sure that my video plays on a level playing field, there's a good chance I won't have that money, especially if you're talking about a video going viral. Sorry, my lights just went out here. I have a timer on the lights in here. Can you still see me?
Actually, we haven't been able to see your video, but that's quite all right. We've been able to hear you.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll just to conclude the thought, really net neutrality comes down to allowing just to preserve that level playing field, and to make sure that in many ways this is about letting a million flowers bloom, right? There's so much potential in the internet if we can leave it open and free, or as free as possible, to as many people as possible. That openness is the real virtue of it, and we are at risk of losing it should we lose the battle of net neutrality.
Well, that was our last question. Michael, do you have an email that you would be willing to share with our audience if they have any additional questions about this? Or
Yeah.
would you prefer that they go to your website?
Either one is fine. Mediatedcultures.net is my website, and mike.wesch@gmail.com is probably the best way to reach me by email. So.
All right. That's fantastic, and we're putting that up in the chat for everybody to see. So, wow. I can't thank you enough, Michael, for sharing this really valuable information, and as I mentioned earlier, eye-opening information. It really has, I think, shown what social media and the digital age is doing and is going to do in the future. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'd like to thank everyone for sharing this presentation with Michael Wesch, and we have shared his website, so if you have any additional questions, please feel free to forward them to him. And I would like to tell everybody to have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.